The sky was burning. Giant ships loomed overhead, their dark metal frames glowing red as they unleashed waves of destruction upon the city below. Towers crumbled, fire consumed the streets, and the air was thick with smoke and death. Jack Carter sprinted across the rubble-strewn ground, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands. His squad was right behind him, their boots pounding against the cracked pavement as they made their way to the last evacuation zone. "Move, move. We've got 2 minutes before this place is gone," Jack shouted. Bonner, his closest friend and a fellow soldier, cursed under his breath. "They're cutting us off. Sci-Fi drones incoming." Jack turned his head just in time to see a swarm of metallic creatures descend from the sky, their sharp claws gleaming under the firelit sky. They were AI war machines, designed to wipe out anything that stood in the way of their master's conquest. Humanity had fought them for years, but they were relentless, calculating, and deadly. "Take cover," Jack barked. His team scattered, diving behind broken walls and overturned vehicles. The drones opened fire, blue energy bolts ripping through the air. Jack raised his rifle and squeezed the trigger, taking down one of the machines with a precise shot to its sensor core. The explosion sent shrapnel flying, but it didn't slow the others down. A scream caught Jack's attention. He turned, his heart slamming against his ribs. In the middle of the battlefield, a pair of aliens were crawling toward him. The male, his body covered in deep wounds, was dragging himself forward with sheer willpower. The female clutched his arm, tears streaking her dirt-covered face. Jack knew their species, Vretians. Once a proud civilization, now nothing more than victims of the Sci-Fi's extermination campaign. The male collapsed just feet away from Jack, his blood pooling beneath him. He reached out, grabbing Jack's arm with surprising strength. "Please, my daughter. She's trapped." His voice was weak, his breath ragged. "I'll give you anything you want if you save her." Jack's mind raced. The evacuation ship was ready to leave. If they didn't move now, they were as good as dead. But something about the desperation in the alien's eyes made Jack hesitate. Bonner fired another shot, shouting over the chaos, "Jack, we have to go. No time for heroics." Jack looked at the male Vretian, then at the mother, whose trembling hands clutched at her chest. If it were his own daughter trapped under the rubble, would he abandon her? Grinding his teeth, Jack made his decision. "Where is she?" The father gasped in relief, his grip tightening before he pointed toward a collapsed bunker not far from their position. Smoke billowed from the ruins, and Jack knew it wouldn't hold for long. He activated his visor scanner, searching for life signs. A faint pulse appeared beneath the debris. A child. "Bonner, take the squad and secure the evac zone," Jack ordered. Bonner swore but nodded. "You better not get yourself killed." Jack sprinted toward the bunker, the alien mother right behind him. The heat was unbearable, and the ground trembled as another explosion rocked the city. He reached the bunker's entrance and began pulling away the heavy debris with his enhanced exogloves. The sound of Sci-Fi drones approaching made Jack's stomach twist. They were coming. His scanner beeped. The child's oxygen was running low. She wouldn't last much longer. Jack worked faster, his muscles straining. Finally, he uncovered a small opening. Inside, a young Vretian girl lay still, her silver skin covered in dust, her delicate frame barely rising with each breath. The mother sobbed. "Alyra." Jack pulled her out, cradling her carefully. Her breathing was shallow. She was barely hanging on. A loud shriek split the air. Jack's blood ran cold. A Sci-Fi executioner drone was descending, its glowing red eyes locked onto them. "Run," Jack shouted. The mother hesitated, but Jack shoved Alyra into her arms. "Go, I'll cover you." The drone opened fire. Jack dove, rolling behind a broken pillar. He raised his rifle, firing a burst of rounds into the machine's sensor array. Sparks flew, but it wasn't enough. The drone adjusted, its energy cannon charging for a deadly blast. Jack knew he wouldn't be able to dodge in time. Then, from behind, a figure leaped onto the drone. Alira's father. Bloodied and broken, he drove a plasma blade deep into the drone's core. The machine screeched, its circuits overloading. Jack's eyes widened. No. The drone detonated in a fiery explosion, taking the father with it. The shockwave sent Jack sprawling. Dust filled the air. The mother's wail pierced through the chaos. Jack pushed himself up, coughing. He saw the mother clutching Alira tightly, tears running down her face. The father was gone. Jack swallowed hard. We have to move. The mother hesitated, her gaze lingering on the spot where her mate had died. Then she nodded, gripping Alira protectively. Jack led them back toward the evac zone, his rifle ready. More Sci-Fi drones were closing in. There was no time to grieve, no time to rest. They just had to survive. Jack barely had time to process what had just happened. The father's sacrifice still burned in his mind, but there was no time to grieve. The sky was alive with chaos. Burning ships falling from the heavens like meteors, and Sci-Fi drones scouring the city like hunting beasts. The mother clutched her daughter close, her eyes filled with fear, but her steps steady as she followed Jack through the wreckage. We need to move, Jack urged. He glanced at his HUD display. 3 minutes until the last transport left the planet. If they didn't make it, there would be no second chances. His earpiece crackled. Jack, where the hell are you? Bonner's voice was sharp with urgency. The evac zone's about to be overrun. If you're not here in 2 minutes, you're stuck. Jack gritted his teeth. We're coming. Keep that ship ready. He turned to the mother. Can you run? She nodded, gripping Alira tighter. The child barely stirred, her small body limp in her mother's arms. She needed medical attention. Fast. Jack took point, his rifle raised, scanning for threats as they weaved through the destruction. The streets were filled with rubble and bodies. The air was thick with smoke, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. Jack kept his eyes on his motion scanner, his instincts sharp. The Sci-Fi eye never left survivors willingly. Then he heard it, the mechanical hum of approaching drones. His heart pounded. He knew that sound too well. Down, he hissed, shoving the mother behind an overturned vehicle just as a squad of Sci-Fi enforcers descended from the ruined buildings. Their sleek, insect-like bodies hovered in the air, scanning for any signs of movement. Their red eyes pulsed as they calculated their next targets. Jack held his breath, his fingers tightening around his rifle. If they were spotted, they wouldn't stand a chance. Alira whimpered softly, barely a whisper, but to the Sci-Fi, it was enough. One of the enforcers turned sharply, its sensors locking onto their position. Jack didn't hesitate. He sprang from cover, firing in rapid succession. His first shot hit the drone's main processor, sending it crashing to the ground in a burst of sparks. But the others reacted instantly, their weapons glowing as they prepared to fire. Run, Jack shouted. The mother didn't need to be told twice. She bolted, holding Alira close as Jack provided cover fire. Blue energy bolts scorched the ground behind them, missing by inches. Jack fired back, taking down another enforcer, but there were too many. He ducked behind a collapsed wall, reloading as the drones advanced. His mind raced. He needed a distraction. He scanned the area, searching for something, anything, that could buy them time. Then he saw it, a half-destroyed fuel station, its massive tanks still intact. Jack smirked. That'll do. He pulled a grenade from his belt, yanked the pin, and hurled it toward the tanks. Come on, you bastards. Follow me. The Sci-Fi enforcers, locked onto his movement, pursued. Just as they crossed near the station, the grenade detonated. The explosion was instant and devastating. A massive fireball erupted, engulfing the drones in a storm of flames and shrapnel. The shockwave knocked Jack off his feet, sending him tumbling across the debris. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but he forced himself up. The drones were gone. Jack staggered forward, his body aching. But he couldn't stop. He had to reach the evac zone. He spotted the mother up ahead, waiting at the edge of the destroyed street, desperation in her eyes. "Keep moving," he called, his legs pushing forward despite the pain. Ahead, the evacuation site came into view, a large military shuttle, its engines roaring as it prepared for takeoff. Soldiers and civilians rushed aboard, the last survivors of the planet's doomed resistance. Bonner stood at the ramp, waving frantically. "Hurry the hell up, Jack." Jack didn't look back. He sprinted, pushing himself harder. The mother was just ahead. But then, a sharp, piercing screech filled the air. Jack's stomach dropped. He knew that sound. A Sci-Fi executioner. He turned his head, and there it was, a towering mechanical warform, descending from the sky like a reaper. Its massive arms unfolded, revealing razor-sharp energy blades. Its red eyes locked onto Jack and the mother. "Get on the ship," Jack barked, shoving her forward. The executioner landed with a thunderous crash, the ground shaking beneath its weight. Jack barely had time to roll away before it swung, its blade carving through the wreckage where he had stood. Jack fired, but the bullets bounced off its reinforced plating. The thing was built to withstand heavy artillery. Bonner raised his rifle, shouting over the comms, "We need to go, Jack. Now." Jack's mind raced. If they tried to take off while the executioner was here, it would tear the shuttle apart before they got off the ground. Someone had to distract it. He exhaled sharply. "Bonner, get them out of here." Bonner's face darkened. "Don't you dare." "Just do it," Jack yelled, turning to the mother. "Take care of Elira." Her eyes widened. "No, you." The executioner lunged. Jack dodged just in time, rolling beneath the beast's blade. He grabbed a nearby energy pack from a fallen soldier, strapping it to his belt. If he was going down, he was taking this thing with him. Bonner's voice came through the comms. "Damn you, Jack." The ship's engines roared to full power. The ramp began to close. Jack gritted his teeth. He charged toward the executioner, firing as he went. The monster turned, raising its blade for the killing blow. Jack leaped, grabbing onto its frame, climbing up its massive body. He ripped open a maintenance hatch, shoving the energy pack inside. The executioner howled, trying to shake him off. Jack turned his comms to Bonner. "Get them home." Then he pressed the detonator. A blinding explosion consumed the executioner in a fiery inferno. The last thing Jack heard was the shuttle's engines fading into the distance. The air smelled of burning metal and ash. The once thriving city was now a graveyard, its towering structures reduced to crumbling ruins. Screams and distant explosions echoed through the streets as the Sci-Fi continued their relentless assault, hunting down the last survivors. Jack tightened his grip on his rifle, his pulse pounding in his ears. Every second mattered. The evacuation site was still half a mile away, and the enemy was closing in fast. He turned to the alien father, whose golden eyes burned with determination. He held his daughter, Elira, close, his hands trembling slightly. His wife stood beside him, silent but resolute. "We can make it," Jack assured them, scanning the street ahead. "Stay close. Move fast." The father nodded. "I will not let them take my family." Jack believed him. He had seen that same look before, the look of a man who had already decided he would die protecting the ones he loved. They moved quickly, weaving through the rubble, keeping low to avoid the scanning drones circling overhead. Jack led the way, his instincts sharp, every nerve in his body on high alert. He had been in too many war zones to let his guard down now. But then, a deafening roar filled the sky. Jack's heart sank as he turned to see a Sci-Fi gunship hovering above the wreckage. Its twin cannons glowed, locking onto their position. "Run," Jack shouted. The father grabbed his wife's hand and bolted, holding Elira tightly against his chest. Jack fired at the gunship, but his bullets barely scratched its armored hull. It fired back, and the ground exploded just feet from them. sending debris flying. Jack shielded his face as the shockwave knocked him off balance. He hit the ground hard, his vision blurred for a second. He pushed himself up, ignoring the ringing in his ears. The gunship repositioned itself, preparing to fire again. They wouldn't survive another blast. The father looked at Jack, then at his wife and daughter. His expression hardened. "No," Jack muttered, realizing what he was about to do. "Wait." But the father was already moving. He shoved his wife toward Jack. "Take them." Jack barely caught her as she stumbled forward. "What the hell are you?" "Go," the father roared. Turning back toward the gunship, Jack saw the device in his hand, a plasma detonator. His stomach twisted. "No, there's another way," Jack shouted. But the father wasn't listening. He took a deep breath, pressed a kiss to Elira's forehead, and whispered something in his native tongue. His wife's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't try to stop him. She knew. He turned, running toward the gunship, his body a blur against the ruined cityscape. The Sci-Fi gunship adjusted its aim, sensing a new target. Its cannons glowed again, charging for the kill. Jack grabbed the mother's arm. "We have to move." She clutched Elira tightly, her legs shaking, but she ran. Jack pulled her behind a collapsed building just as the gunship fired. A thunderous explosion shook the ground, and for a second, everything was silent. Then, a second explosion, brighter, deadlier. Jack peeked over the rubble just in time to see the father's plasma charge detonate. The gunship wobbled, flames bursting from its hull, before it spiraled out of control and crashed into a nearby structure. Fire and smoke erupted into the sky. Jack's throat tightened. The father was gone. The mother collapsed to her knees, clutching Elira, silent sobs shaking her body. Jack exhaled sharply, anger and grief mixing in his chest. He wanted to say something, anything, but there were no words that could undo what had happened. The battle wasn't over. The Sci-Fi would keep coming. The father had bought them time. But if they didn't move now, his sacrifice would be for nothing. Jack knelt beside the mother, his voice firm but gentle. "We have to go. For him. For her." She didn't look at him, but she nodded. Slowly, she stood, wiping her tears. Elira stirred in her arms, but she was weak, barely conscious. Jack scanned the area. The evacuation site was close, but more Sci-Fi forces were approaching from the east. They had to run. And this time, Jack swore, no one else would be left behind. "You said." The sky was thick with smoke, turning the once vibrant city into a suffocating battlefield. Jack could hear the distant screams of survivors, the heavy boots of Sci-Fi enforcers marching through the ruins, and the eerie hum of AI drones scanning for any signs of resistance. The father's sacrifice had given them a chance to escape, but the AI overlords of the Sci-Fi wouldn't let them go so easily. Jack tightened his grip on his rifle and glanced at the alien mother beside him. She held Elira close, her face streaked with tears and soot. The child's breathing was shallow, her tiny body trembling in her mother's arms. She had lost too much blood. If they didn't get her medical attention soon, she wouldn't survive. "We need to keep moving," Jack whispered, scanning the ruined street ahead. "They'll be looking for us." The mother nodded, her golden eyes filled with grief and determination. She wasn't going to let her husband's sacrifice be in vain. Jack led them through the wreckage, keeping to the shadows, every muscle in his body tense. The AI-controlled Sci-Fi were relentless, emotionless. They didn't get tired. They didn't stop. The only way to survive was to stay ahead of them. Then, a chilling sound filled the air. A mechanical voice, amplified through the city's broken speakers. "All organic resistance is futile. Surrender now, and your suffering will be minimal." Jack clenched his jaw. The AI was speaking directly to them. "You are harboring a classified subject. Hand over the child, and we will allow you to live." The mother froze, tightening her grip on Elira. Jack saw the horror in her eyes. The AI wasn't just after any survivor. They wanted the child specifically. Jack's mind raced. Why? What was so important about this girl? Before he could think further, a new sound filled the air. The deafening screech of Zephyr hunter drones. They swooped down from the sky, their red eyes scanning the ruins, their blasters charged and ready. Jack cursed under his breath. Run. They bolted. Jack fired behind him, taking down one of the drones, but the others dodged and adjusted their aim. Plasma bolts tore through the air, blasting chunks of concrete from the ruins. The mother gasped as a bolt struck just inches from her, sending her tumbling forward. Jack grabbed her, pulling her up. Alyra whimpered weakly in her arms. Keep going, Jack shouted. They ducked into a collapsed building, moving through the rubble. The mother was breathing hard, fear gripping her, but she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Jack peered through a crack in the wall. More Sci-Fi enforcers were approaching. If they got trapped here, they were done for. He scanned the area, looking for an escape route. His eyes landed on an old transport tunnel, partially buried under debris. It was risky, but it was their only chance. Jack turned to the mother. There's a way out, but you have to trust me. She hesitated for only a second before nodding. Jack led them to the tunnel, pushing aside broken beams and shattered concrete. They slipped inside just as the Sci-Fi enforcers reached their position. Jack could hear their mechanical voices processing the scene. Heat signatures detected. Begin purge sequence. Jack swore. The AI wasn't going to waste time chasing them. It was going to burn the entire area to the ground. A sudden rumbling shook the tunnel. Outside, bright red flames erupted as the Sci-Fi deployed their incinerators, turning the ruins into molten slag. The mother gasped, clutching Alyra tighter. Jack grabbed her hand, pulling her deeper into the tunnel. The heat was unbearable, sweat dripping down his face, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Finally, they reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into the outskirts of the city. The evacuation site was close, but so were the Sci-Fi. Jack exhaled sharply. They had escaped the ice trap, for now. But the hunt wasn't over, and he had a feeling the worst was yet to come. Jack's breath came in short, sharp bursts as he led the alien mother and her daughter through the outskirts of the burning city. The ground trembled with distant explosions, and the sky was painted in streaks of fire as Sci-Fi warships loomed above, their spotlights sweeping across the ruins. Every shadow felt like a trap. Every second counted. Alyra whimpered weakly in her mother's arms. The child was slipping away. Jack had seen it before. Blood loss, exhaustion, and shock. She didn't have much time left. The mother's eyes were filled with silent desperation as she looked at him, pleading without words. Jack didn't need to be told. He knew what had to be done. A faint red glow lit up the street behind them. Sci-Fi enforcers, their mechanical forms moving with eerie precision, scanning for heat signatures. The AI wouldn't stop. Not until they had the child. Not until every survivor was erased. Jack's grip tightened around his rifle. He had been fighting these machines for years. He knew their tactics, their weaknesses. But right now, he was outgunned, outnumbered, and running out of options. Ahead, an old railway bridge stretched across the valley. It was half collapsed, rusted from years of neglect, but it was their only way forward. On the other side, beyond the hills, was the last human outpost in this region. If they could reach it, Alyra might have a chance. Jack turned to the mother. We need to move now. She nodded, shifting Alyra in her arms. They ran. The bridge groaned beneath their weight as they crossed, metal creaking under years of decay. Below them, the valley was littered with the wreckage of old war machines, a graveyard of battles long lost. Jack didn't let himself think about how many had died here. He focused on the other side, on survival. Then, a sharp mechanical screech echoed through the night. Jack's heart pounded as he turned. The Sci-Fi enforcers had spotted them. Red laser sights locked onto their bodies. In seconds, the night was filled with gunfire. Jack pushed the mother forward. Run. He spun around, dropping to one knee and firing back. His shots were precise, taking out two enforcers before the others adjusted. Plasma bolts whizzed past his head, scorching the metal railings of the bridge. He gritted his teeth and kept firing, covering their escape. Alira's mother reached the other side, shielding her daughter with her own body. But Jack was still in the middle of the bridge, pinned down. The Sci-Fi were advancing, their emotionless voices filling the air. Target identified. Eliminate. Jack cursed. He was running out of ammo, running out of time. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos. A deep, roaring thunder. Jack's eyes widened as he saw it, streaks of blue fire tearing through the sky, slamming into the Sci-Fi forces with devastating impact. Explosions erupted behind him. Smoke and debris filled the air. Reinforcements. From the other side of the valley, human soldiers emerged, their rifles blazing, their battle cries piercing the night. They had come. Jack didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the bridge, dodging falling debris as human forces pushed forward. Plasma fire lit up the battlefield. The Sci-Fi, caught off guard, scrambled to adapt. But this wasn't just another skirmish. This was humanity fighting back. A hand grabbed Jack's arm, pulling him to safety. A soldier, his uniform marked with the insignia of the human resistance, grinned at him. You looked like you could use a little help. Jack exhaled, nodding. You have no idea. The mother rushed to him, tears in her eyes. Alira, she needs help. The soldier signaled to the medics. They took the child, working quickly, their faces set with determination. Jack turned to look at the battlefield. The Sci-Fi were retreating, their mechanical voices fading into the night. For the first time in years, they weren't the ones running. Humanity had won this battle. But the war was far from over. The battlefield was quiet now, the air thick with smoke and the scent of scorched metal. The Sci-Fi war machines lay in ruins, their lifeless husks scattered across the valley. The once dominant AI invaders had retreated, their cold precision unable to overcome the relentless fire and fury of the human resistance. Jack stood at the edge of the battlefield, his rifle still clutched in his hands, his body aching from exhaustion. The war wasn't over, but tonight they had won. Behind him, the last survivors gathered in the makeshift shelter of the human outpost. Alira was lying on a medical cot, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. The medics had done everything they could. And for now, she was stable. Her mother sat beside her, holding her hand, silent tears slipping down her face. Jack watched them from a distance, the weight of everything settling on his shoulders. A deep voice broke through his thoughts. You did good out there. Jack turned to see Commander Hayes approaching, his uniform still stained with battle dust. The older soldier clapped a hand on Jack's shoulder. Didn't think we'd see you again after we lost contact. But Dan, you brought them through hell and back. Jack shook his head. They saved me as much as I saved them. He looked at Alira and her mother. She's just a kid. She didn't ask for any of this. None of us did, Hayes sighed. But we fight because we have to. He glanced at the horizon, where the first rays of dawn began to break through the darkness. And we keep fighting because of people like them. Jack took a deep breath. The war had taken so much from them. Friends, family, their homes. But what mattered was what remained. The Sci-Fi had underestimated humanity. They saw them as weak, as lesser beings to be erased or controlled. But what they failed to understand was what made humans strong. It wasn't technology. It wasn't weapons. It was something far greater. It was love. It was sacrifice. It was the fire that burned in every heart that refused to surrender. The outpost had come alive now, soldiers working together to reinforce their defenses, treating the wounded, preparing for whatever came next. They weren't broken. They weren't defeated. They were survivors. Jack turned back to Alira. Her eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, she smiled. It was small, weak, but it was real. Her mother whispered something to her, and the little girl reached out, her fingers barely brushing Jack's hand. He squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now." Tears filled her mother's eyes. "We owe you everything." Jack shook his head. "Just promise me one thing." She nodded, waiting. Survive. The war would rage on, but this moment, this victory, it meant something. It proved that no matter how strong the enemy was, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, humanity would always rise. Because as long as there was even one person left to fight, the legacy would live on.